everyone, Miss Carrie here from Miss Carrie's Creations. Today I'm going to show you how to use 2 stamp sets along with your TriBlend markers to create 3 simple floral meadows cards. Let's go ahead and get started with the project. On today's project, I'm going to be using a couple of different supplies. Let's take a look at the stamp sets first. I'm going to be using the Daisy Meadows Scrapbooking Stamp and Thin Cuts bundle. Any of the images you see shaded in blue can be cut out using the thin cuts that come in this package. I'm also going to be using the Sentiments and Stitches stamp set. This is an older stamp set, but it's one of my favorites because of all the stitching stamps and fun little sentiments. I also have a pile of scraps that I have cut for these cards. I've been rummaging through my scrap bin trying to use up some scraps, and today we're going to be using those on these cards. Quite a few of the elements for these cards were cut using this Fancy Borders Thin Cut bundle. On this card, I used this arc shape stitched border. This was cut out of white daisy cardstock. On this peacock grid paper, I used kind of this cloud shape stitched border. This was cut at an angle across that pattern paper, and then I cut a matching piece out of peacock. I also have a piece of white daisy here that I cut using this lace border. Now all of these borders are continuous, so you can cut them the full length of a piece of cardstock and then cut them down wherever you need to cut them for your project. Now that I have all of the elements for my cards cut, I can start stamping some of the images using that Daisy Meadows Scrapbooking stamp set. All of the images are going to be stamped on some scraps of white daisy using intense black ink. I'm going to be shading all of the images using our TriBlend markers, so I want to use an ink that is not going to smear while I'm using those alcohol markers. Intense black is my go-to ink whenever I'm shading any image with either watercolors or alcohol ink. It is designed to work with both of these mediums, and it stamps beautifully on white cardstock. I'm going to be stamping all of my images on white daisy today. I'm making sure I leave plenty of room between each of the images so that I can lay down the thin cut dies when I go to cut these out. Off camera, I have finished stamping all of my images. These leaves have been stamped in peacock ink. The flowers, the leaves, and a butterfly image have all been stamped on white daisy using that intense black. Now I'm going to adhere all of these thin cut dies down onto my image so that I can cut them all out using my embossing machine. I've grabbed some thin Post-it tape to help me hold each of the dies in place, and I'm going to place each die down onto the image, secure it in place with the Post-it tape, and then I'm going to be placing this down onto my platform. This project goes a lot quicker if you can cut multiple images at once on your embossing machine. Now remember how I said that you need to stamp your images so that you have enough room to place down multiple dies. I did not do that here between the flower and the leaf die is not going to fit onto this sheet, so I'm going to have to place it on a separate piece of cardstock. Don't ever try to place those thin cut dies too closely or overlap them, or it will destroy them when you try to put them through your die cut machine. Now that all of the thin cuts have been temporarily taped down onto the cardstock, I'm going to place all of these pieces onto my magnetic platform. Now all I have to do is run them through my die cut machine, and in one pass I have cut out multiple images. This Post-it tape doesn't cause any damage to my image or cardstock. All I have to do is peel off each die, then place it onto one of the other images and continue to run them through until I have all of my stamped pieces cut out for my cards. Now that I have all of my stamped images cut out, I'm going to start assembling all of the backgrounds for my cards. On this first card, I have a piece of perfect match pink plaid paper that I've cut at 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. On top of that, we have a piece of white daisy cardstock that we cut using that Fancy Borders Thin Cut bundle. Before I shade all of the images, I'm going to be building my cards using the black and white images. Once I have decided the placement for all the floral images, I'm going to go ahead and stamp some of my sentiments and stitches using that Sentiments and Stitches stamp set. Now you're going to see me pause for a moment, and that's because I'm reaching up on my phone and I'm hitting the little camera icon so that I can snap a picture of this to refer to later when I go back to assemble the card with the shaded images. So the first thing I want to do on this card is add some stitching across the top. Instead of doing this by hand, I'm going to be using one of the stitched stamped images from the Sentiments and Stitches stamp set. I'm going to be stamping this small zigzag stitching in peacock ink. I'm going to stamp it 3 times across the top. Once I've finished stamping that stitched image, then I'm going to add the sentiment. I've chosen a sentiment that says, "Life is sweeter when shared with a friend like you." I'm going to stamp this sentiment in the upper left-hand corner using some intense black ink. Now that I have all of the images and sentiments stamped onto that white daisy cardstock, I can go ahead and adhere it onto that pink plaid paper, set it aside with all of its stamped images, and I'm going to go ahead and assemble the second card. Before I add this canary plaid paper onto the card, I'm going to add some stitched images along the edge. This canary paper comes from the Daisy Meadows paper collection. It matches really well with our peacock color, and that's the color of ink I've chosen for this stitched image. I'm going to stamp the zigzag stitch along the edge of that canary plaid paper, and then I'm going to adhere it down onto that white daisy lace. Now at this point I realized that this decorative edge is going to end right in the middle of a scallop. And to me, this is just a little bit of a pet peeve. I hate to have a partial scallop on the end of a project. Knowing how this card is going to look in the end, I've decided to overlap a couple of the scallops near the base, and this will make it look like I have a full scallop at the top and the bottom of the card. Where the 2 scallops meet is going to be covered with a stamped image, so you will never know that it was there. I've placed a little piece of peacock cardstock on the other side of that yellow plaid paper, and then I'm going to adhere all of my borders onto the left side of the card. Once again, I am laying out all of those floral images onto the card so that I know where to stamp the sentiment. I'm going to snap a quick picture of this design, and then I'm going to use my intense black ink to stamp the sentiment that says, "Life is better with friends." On my third card, I'm going to adhere this peacock plaid mix-ins paper onto a piece of peacock that I have cut with a matching scallop edge. Across the top, I'm going to be using another stitch image from that Sentiments and Stitches stamp set, and I'm going to stamp that design across the top using some peacock ink. I love adding handmade stitching to my cards and scrapbook pages, but sometimes I don't have time to add those stitches. So stitched stamped images are a great alternative and give your project a wonderful handmade look. Now I'm going to adhere that patterned piece onto the top of the card, determine the placement for all of my floral images, snap a quick photo, and then I'm going to stamp a sentiment on the lower left corner that says, "People like you make the world pretty great." Now that the cards are assembled and I've determined which images I'm using for each card, I can start shading them using my TriBlend markers. Right here in my notebook, I have my swatch sheet so that I can match the colors with the patterns and papers that I have chosen for my cards. On the smaller flowers, I'm going to be using gold yellow. I'm going to shade the flowers using the lightest color first. Then I'm going to highlight all of the shadows using the golden yellow 5, one of the darkest colors in that blend. Then I'm going to blend all of the colors using the medium golden yellow color, and then I'm going to come back again and blend it all together using that light golden yellow. For the leaves, I'm going to be using vintage blue. Now this seems like an odd color to use, but it is one of the colors that matches really well with the peacock ink I chose for the other leaves. I'm going to shade the leaves in the light vintage blue color, add a little bit of shading with the dark vintage blue, and then blend the two colors together using the medium vintage blue color. Most of the leaves on this project are going to be shaded using the vintage blue TriBlend marker. So I've gone ahead and added that light vintage blue color to the whole leaf. I'm going to add some shading to the veins and the base of the leaf using the deep vintage blue. Then I'm going to blend the two colors together using the medium shade. And then I'm going to come back with the light vintage blue one more time to blend everything together. Now sometimes I want to add even more depth to an image. So I will grab my ice gray marker, use the deep shade of ice gray to add some more shading to the veins and the base of the leaves. And then I'll come back with the original color, which is that vintage blue color, and just blend everything together. On my medium flower, I'm going to be blending quite a few colors. I'm going to start out with the Fair Skin blend. Then I'm going to add some of my coral blends. I'm going to add shading with the coral shades, and the center of the flower is going to be shaded using golden yellow. I'm going to start out with the Fair Skin to give it a very pale color in the background. On top of the Fair Skin color, I'm going to add a light shade of coral. I chose to blend these two colors together because the coral shade was just a little bit too corally. It had too much of an orange tone. The Fair Skin helped to lighten that shade. After adding the lighter shades, I'm come in with the dark coral tone. I'm just adding a little bit of shading in the center of the flower. Then I'm going to blend the two shades together using that medium coral tone. And then I'm going to use those dark coral shades to add depth and shadow to the center of the flower. As I add shadows, I'm using the image as my guide. You can see where the petals should overlap, where the petals meet, and where there are curves and creases in the petals. This is where you will want to add your shading. In the centers of the flowers, I'm using that golden yellow to match the golden yellow flowers I shaded earlier. I'm just going to mix and match all of the tones just to add a little bit of depth and texture to the center of the flower. To make these flowers really stand out on the card, I'm going to add some shimmer. I have my clear shimmer brush, and I'm going to brush that shimmer across each one of the petals. This will give that image a nice bit of shine and make it really stand out on the card. So I've shaded all of the images I need for the first card. Now I'm going to bring in the images that I need for the second card. A few of these I did already add color to off camera using the same colors and techniques that I used on the previous card. This flower is a little bit lighter than the first, but I did use the same colors as I used on the first flower. Now we're going to start shading the large flower. I'm going to start out with my antique pink blend, and I'm going to use the lighter tone to shade each one of the petals. You might have noticed that with each of these images, I'm starting out by shading them using the lighter tone on each marker. This allows you to blend those darker tones with the lighter tones, giving you a nice balance and blend of color. On the centers of the flowers where I want to add shading, I'm using that darker tone of antique pink. One of the reasons I enjoy using these TriBlends is for the simple fact that 3 tones come in one pen. I don't have to search through my bin to try to figure out which tones go together. It's all built into one marker. So after adding that darker tone of antique pink, I'm just blending it all together with the medium tone, and then I'm coming back with the lighter tone to blend all 3 shades together. On this flower, I wanted a darker center, so I've added a little bit more of that dark antique pink, and I felt like it still didn't give me the shadows I was looking for. So I've grabbed the bright pink shades pen, and I'm coming in and adding even more shadows with that bright pink. I think the bright pink and the antique pink play very well together, especially on these large flowers. On the center of this flower, I'm blending antique pink with the coral shades I used on the smaller flower. This just adds continuity between the two flowers and gives it a soft, layered look in the center of the large flower. All of the other leaves on these designs have been shaded with that antique blue. I decided to have these larger leaves stand out a little bit more, so I'm using jade green instead. This has a little bit of a blue tone, like the peacock and the antique blue, but it's just a little bit brighter, and it goes really well with those pink and coral shades I chose for the flowers. I'm sure you noticed that I did things a little bit backwards this time. I used the dark jade shade first around the leaves and in the vein, and then I started blending with all of the lighter tones of jade. I just wanted to see how this would work. This is the first time I have tried this technique. I read about it on a website, and I'm not really sure I like how well it blends together when you start out with the darker tones. It took me a little bit longer to blend all the colors together when I used the darker tone first, so I don't think I will use this method again. The berries on this flower are going to be shaded using those golden yellow tones. Once again, this just adds to the continuity of the design. It matches the yellow on the card, and it also matches the yellow on the other two flowers. All right, so now all of our images have been shaded with those TriBlends. I'm going to go ahead and grab some of my foam tape and adhesive, and I'm going to start layering all of these images together on the front of my cards. I'm going to start out with this peacock plaid card. We're going to place all of the images down. Remember how I said I snapped a photograph earlier? Right now that photograph is sitting up on my computer so that I can remember how this card was supposed to go together. Often I snap photos of my scrapbook pages and my cards while I'm in the what I call dry fit process. This old brain doesn't remember things like it used to. So by snapping a photo, I have something to refer to when I start putting my images back together. Now, originally I had planned on leaving this butterfly black and white, but after taking a look at it, it needed a little bit of color. So I have just grabbed my pale pink blends. I'm adding some soft shades here and there on the butterfly, and then I'm going to tuck it behind the leaves on this card. I had attempted to stamp a couple of leaves below that flower, but I really didn't like how they looked, so I'm going to layer some loops of silver embellishing thread over the leaves to try to hide my mistake. I've just created a couple of little loops. I'm going to adhere them together using a glue dot, and then I'm going to place these underneath that flower on the right side. You can still see those leaves peeking through, but the embellishing thread does hide them quite a bit, and it looks really pretty on this card. To finish up the card, I'm going to embellish it using some Daisy Meadows dots in a peach color. This matches the flower and the butterfly images, and it adds just a little fun element at the top of the card. All right, so now our first card is complete with all of those beautiful peach, pink, coral, and yellow tones that all go well together with the peacock paper. Let's go ahead and get started on putting together the second card. Right now I'm looking at the original design, and I'm not quite sure if I like where that little flower is going to go. Once I add this large flower on top, it just doesn't feel very balanced. So I'm going to take off the small flower and just work with the large flower for right now. To balance out the peacock colored leaves, I'm going to be adding some of these little dot stamped images from that Daisy Meadows stamp set. These are going to be stamped in peacock to create a triangle image with the other peacock leaves I stamped there on the left. Now I'm just going to add some of my other leaf images onto the card. I'm going to place that medium flower near the top of the card which to me feels much more balanced. And then I'm going to go ahead and start layering the rest of the images on the front of this card. As I'm layering all of these die-cut images, I am trying to create an arc shape around the sentiment. This just draws your eye to the sentiment and still leaves plenty of white space around all of those floral images. I ended up moving those peacock leaves, so I've kind of lost my visual triangle. So I'm going to go in and add another set of stamped dots just to balance out the front of this card. Just like on the first card, I'm going to add a couple of loops of silver embellishing thread. One loop is going to go down at the bottom of the card. It's going to be tucked under those little yellow berries. The other loop is going to be placed at the top of the flowers, tucked underneath that medium coral colored flower. The last little embellishment are some daisy meadow dots in a peacock color. I'm just going to place these on the card in a triangle shape. All right, so now our second card is complete. Check out all that sparkle from the shimmer brush. Isn't that just beautiful? All right, so now we're down to the third card. This one's going to go together really quickly. As you can see, this larger flower is shaded a little bit differently than the other one. I used the vintage blue on the leaves, and I used a lot of the deep coral colors. I also used the coral colors on the small flowers instead of yellow to match that pink plaid paper. Whenever I'm laying a flower across an arc shape like that white daisy, I try to match up some of the elements to help your eye follow that arc. When I laid down this flower, I placed the point of the leaf against the edge of the arc. This is going to help your eye flow across the card without breaking up that arc shape. I really like the look of that vintage blue with the peacock and the pink colors. Like I said, vintage blue probably isn't a color that you would use to shade your leaves, but it matches really well with peacock and coral and that really bright pink plaid background. Just like on the other two cards, I'm going to add some loops of silver embellishing thread. Now, if you've never created loops like this before, let me give you a few tips and tricks. First of all, you want to make sure you get all the kinks out of your thread. I usually run it along my fingernail. Then I just loop the thread around my fingers. I adjust the loop sizes, and then I adhere the base of the loops all together using a glue dot. I like to use tweezers to help me put these loops in place. Not only does it help me see where the loop needs to go, but it also allows me to use my other hand to lift the die cuts and carefully put those loops into place. All right, now all three cards are complete. We were able to use the Daisy Meadows scrapbooking stamp set and thin cuts, along with the Sentiments and Stitches stamp set to create all three cards. Now, remember, this stamp set comes with all of these little stitch icons and the sentiments, and both these stamp sets are on sale during the month of April during the Stamptacular sale. On the first card, we used corals and peacock colors along with a little bit of golden yellow. We created that scalloped edge with our fancy borders thin cut, layering both our mix-in and our peacock cardstock together to create that beautiful edge. On the second card, we used some leftover scraps from the Daisy Meadows collection. We have that fun little plaid over here on the left with some stitching and that lace border. And then we created some beautiful flowers in antique pink and floral. On this third and final card, we used this really fun pink plaid along with this arc-shaped border. And then we shaded the flowers to match all of the colors in that pink plaid background. All three of these cards were super simple to make using our TriBlend markers along with these two stamp sets and an array of scraps from my scrap bin. I hope that you enjoyed today's simple Floral Meadows cards. I hope that this project inspired you to try something new and gave you a few new ways to use those stamped images with our TriBlend markers. If you would like to see more card making tutorials, you can click on that collection icon above. While you're at it, go ahead and hit that subscribe icon and the notification bell so that you are notified when I add other card making videos to this channel. I hope you have a wonderful week. I can't wait to see what you create.